This is Chapter 15, Part 3, Money, Interest Rates, and Exchange Rates. We're going to cover the last three topics in Chapter 15. First, we're going to do a review of the long-run versus short-run adjustments in the economy. Then we'll look at effects of monetary factors on price levels and exchange rates in the long run, and short-run exchange rate overshooting. So first we're going to start with a review of the short run and the long run. So in the short run, price level is fixed at some level. The analysis that we've done up to this point has been a short run analysis because we have assumed, at least implicitly, that the price levels are fixed. In the short run, changes in the money supply will affect interest rates R, could affect output Y, and exchange rates E. Now we'll define the long run. In the long run, prices of factors of production and output are allowed to adjust to demand and supply in their respective markets. Wages will adjust to the demand and supply of labor. Real output and income Y are determined by the amount of workers and other factors of production, by the economy's productive capacity, and not by the supply of money. That means in the long run, Y should remain unchanged because Y is determined by the factors of production. The interest rate R depends on the supply of saving and demand for saving in the economy and the inflation rate. And thus it's also independent of the money supply level. So to summarize, in the long run, the level of money supply does not influence the amount of real output Y nor the interest rate R. But in the long run, prices of output and inputs, P, will adjust proportionately to changes in the money supply. And we can see that through the long run equilibrium condition, which we've seen before, which is the real money supply is equal to real money demand. We can rearrange this by multiplying both sides of the equation by P. So we get money supply is equal to P times real aggregate demand for money. Now, just as we said before, in the long run, interest rates and real output are not affected by changes in money supply. So those two things are fixed. So if L is fixed, then if there's changes in the money supply, in the long run, the price levels have to change proportionately. So for example, if the money supply doubles, then eventually in the long run prices will double as well. So increases in the money supply are matched by proportional increases in the price level. Now let's discuss the long run relationship between money supply and price levels. I'm going to give a couple of examples to illustrate this relationship. The first one is the 2005 currency reform in Turkey. So Turkey essentially reduced its money supply by revaluing its lira. So a million old lira was equal to 1 new lira. So a good that cost a million lira before now only costs 1 lira. So essentially, a reduction of the money supply by a million times had the effect of reducing prices by a million times as well. So this is the same idea of what would happen to prices in the long run given a change in the money supply. Let's think about how this revaluing of the lira would affect real output. Currency reform should have no effect on the productive factors within the economy, so the reform has no effect on the full employment output level. Likewise, interest rates shouldn't change either, because using a different scale of currency has no effect on your expectations on the return on an investment. Another way to illustrate this one-for-one proportional relationship is to look at some empirical data. So this is a graph of it's plotting the percent increase in the money supply and then the subsequent percent increase in the price level uh, between the years of 1987 and 2007 for an area of the world that had fairly high inflation rates. So these were developing countries, primarily in Latin America. If the relationship was actually one for one, then you'd see all these red dots line up on the 45-degree line. Now, the empirical results show that it's pretty close. It's not exact, but for the most part, the percent increase in the money supply is met by almost the exact same percent increase in the price level in the economy. So there's lots of empirical evidence that, at least in the long run, price levels will rise to match money supply increases, or will decrease if for money supply decreases. So what is the takeaway message here about the long run? First, that a change in the money supply has no effect on the long run values of the interest rate and real output. And secondly, the prices of output and inputs, P, adjust proportionately to the changes in the money supply. Now we're going to think about price level changes, or inflation, and exchange rate dynamics. The goal here is to tie together the short-run and long-run effects of monetary changes on exchange rates by examining the process through which the price level adjusts to its long-run position. And just as a reminder, inflation occurs when the price level is increasing, and deflation occurs when the price level drops. So let's think about this process of price level change. So how do prices actually change once there's a change in the money supply? So in the short run, like we said earlier, prices don't change. Prices are what we call sticky. They're sticky because of primarily because of labor contracts. So workers, even though there's a change in the amount of money available in the economy, the wages for workers can't be changed overnight. Workers generally have contracts, and those contracts cannot be renegotiated in the present. You have to wait till the end of the contract to do the renegotiation. Likewise, there might be existing long-term price contracts for goods and services. So you might have entered into a 2-year contract with some subcontractor, and that subcontractor can't renegotiate higher for higher prices in the medium time. Now, the process of price level change starts immediately, and I want to stress here that we're talking about a permanent change in the money supply, and I'm going to be talking specifically about a permanent increase in the money supply. And this is very different than a temporary change, because if it's temporary, then we don't have any real expectations about what's going to happen in the future. Whereas if it's a permanent change, then we can have expectations about what the future is going to be like. So first, let's talk about excess demand. So when we have a permanent increase in the money supply, this implies that people will have more funds available to pay for goods and services. So more funds available is going to increase the demand for goods and services in the economy. This will make producers hire more workers to meet that demand. This also creates a strong demand for labor, or it makes existing employees work harder and possibly longer. Wages will need to rise to attract more workers, or to compensate workers for overtime work to produce for this strong demand. Eventually, prices of output will rise to compensate for the higher costs of inputs. Alternatively, for a fixed amount of outputs and inputs, producers can also charge higher prices and still sell all of their output due to strong demand. So the excess demand caused by a permanent increase in the money supply is going to gradually cause the prices of labor and the goods and services that they produce to increase over time as these contracts can be renegotiated. Inflationary expectations will also help the price levels change over time. So this is how this works. If workers expect future prices to rise due to an expected money supply increase, and again, it's an expected permanent money supply increase, they'll want to be compensated for that. And if producers expect the same, then they're more willing to raise the wages. And producers will be able to match the higher costs if they expect that the prices of their goods will rise as well. So the result is that the expectations about inflation caused by an expected money supply increase will lead to actual inflation. This is what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this idea of inflationary expectations will be very important as we discuss the foreign exchange market. When we consider price changes in the long run, inflationary expectations will have an effect in the foreign exchange market. Expectations about future exchange rates are not fixed in long-run analysis of permanent changes to the money supply. So the previous analyses that we've done, we've fixed the expected future spot rate. But this time we're allowing those expectations to change we're allowing for new expectations about future exchange rates. So I call this the mother of all graphs in international finance. So you might need to play this a couple of times to understand how all of this works, because we're going to look at both short-run effects of a permanent increase in the money supply as well as the long-run effects of that permanent increase in the money supply. So we're going to start out with the same graph that we've looked at before, where we have the US money market. And again, the US is the home currency in this case, and the euro is the foreign currency. So the bottom panel is the US money market. The equilibrium interest rate is determined by the intersection of the demand for money and the real supply of money curves. And this is going to set the return on the dollar deposits in the foreign exchange market. And the interest parity condition is going to give us an initial exchange rate of E1. Now, what happens if there's an increase in the money supply? Now remember, in the short run, prices are sticky, so the price level is not going to change immediately. So the money supply changes, but the price level does not. So that's why we have M2 over price level 1. This is going to cause, in the short term, a decrease in the interest rate to R2. And this is also going to, of course, set the return on dollar deposits in the foreign exchange market. The interest parity condition is going to show us that the equilibrium exchange I forgot a step. This is actually where the analysis changes from what we've seen before. Because now we have inflationary expectations in the US market. And so this is going to have effects on how we expect the return on the euro deposits to change. So we're going to expect, as we have inflationary pressures in the US market, that the returns on euro deposits, because euros look much better now, is actually going to increase. So when we're analyzing a permanent change in the money supply, we can have these expectations that the future is going to be like this, where we have the expectation there is going to be inflation. Therefore, we have this expectation that the return on the euro deposits is going to increase. Now we can look at the interest parity condition. using this new expected return on the euro deposits, and so our E2 is much higher than E1. So these are the short run effects. Now we're going to look at the long run effects, and we're going to again start with E2. So this is the exchange rate that we have in the short run. Now over time, so in the long run, the price level is going to adjust in the US market to price level 2. And remember that in the long run, the price level is going to increase proportionately with the money supply. And since it's going to increase proportionately, we're going to actually end up going back to our original position. So M2 over P2 is actually equal to M1 over P1. This is going to have the effect of increasing our interest rate over time back to its original position. But at the same time, in the foreign exchange market, we'll see downward pressure on the exchange rate to level of E3. But note that E3 is still above E1 on the short run side. So our exchange rate never actually goes back to its original position. Instead, it also rises proportionately with the price level. So let me run through this one more time. So we start with our initial equilibrium. The United States decides to change its money supply. It increases its money supply. This is going to decrease the rate of return on the dollar deposits. But because this is a permanent change in the money supply in the US, and so there's expectations of inflation in the US, this is going to make euro deposits look much better. So there's an expectation that the return to euro deposits in dollar terms is going to increase. And using the interest parity condition, we can find the new equilibrium, short-run equilibrium exchange rate at E2. So this is the short run. In the long run, we're going to have the price level adjust proportionately with the increase in the money supply. So we'll see the real money supply go back to its original position. So M2 over P2 is equal to M1 over P1. And as this gradually adjusts back to the original position, the interest rate will also gradually go back to its original position at R1. And at the same time, the exchange rate will gradually come back, but not all the way back to the level of E1, but it will decrease to the level of E3. So to summarize, a permanent increase in a country's money supply causes a proportional long-run depreciation of its currency. However, the dynamics of the model predict a large depreciation first and a smaller subsequent appreciation. So that's the movement. The large depreciation was the movement from E1 to E2, and the subsequent appreciation was the movement from E2 to E3. Likewise, a permanent decrease in a country's money supply causes a proportional long-run appreciation of its currency. However, the dynamics of the model predict a large appreciation first and a smaller subsequent depreciation. Now, I like this time path analysis, and this is analysis of the U.S. economic variables because this is the graphic that I had in terms of U.S. dollars, but this would apply to any home country that had a permanent increase in its money supply. So what we have here is we're going along at money supply 1 until the Federal Reserve or the central bank decides that it's going to permanently increase the money supply. So at T0, this is where the increase occurs, and it's permanent, so we stay at this level continuously. The interest rate starts at R1 and it's going along until we hit T0, which is when we have the change, the permanent increase in the money supply. Again, since it's an increase in the money supply, we'll see a decrease in the interest rate. But over time, as price levels adjust, we're going to see this interest rate increase back to its original position. For the US price level, we start at P1 and we go along at T0. We don't have an immediate change in the price level because of sticky wages. Because of these contractual agreements we have, we can't immediately change prices. So what we see is a gradual increase in the price level after the permanent increase in the money supply. And eventually, once prices fully adjust, then we end up at P2. Finally, with the exchange rate, we start with an exchange rate at E1, and immediately when we have the increase, the permanent increase in the money supply, it's going to jump all the way up to E2. I lost my pointer here. There we go. It's going to jump up to E2, but as the prices adjust in the economy, it's going to come back down until we hit E3. And the overall change in the exchange rate is proportional to the change in the money supply and the price level. So the final topic in this chapter is exchange rate overshooting. Now, actually, I'm going to go back to this graphic. So you note that we start at E1 at the announcement or when the money supply is permanently increased. It shoots way up to E2 and then comes back to rest at E3. So this active shooting way up and then coming back to rest at some lower level, this is the exchange rate overshooting. So exchange rate is said to overshoot when its immediate response to a change is greater than its long-run response. So we assume that changes in the money supply have immediate effects in the short term on interest rates and exchange rates. We also assume that people change their expectations about inflation immediately after a permanent change in the money supply. So overshooting helps explain why exchange rates are so volatile. And overshooting occurs in the model because prices do not adjust quickly, but expectations about prices do. And this graphic gives you some empirical evidences to this exchange rate overshooting. What we have in blue is the ratio of the US-Japan price level, and in red we have the ratio of the exchange rate change. And changes in the price levels are very small. The blue lines don't vary quite so much. So changes in the price levels are less volatile, suggesting that price levels change quite slowly. But the exchange rates are influenced, again, they're influenced by the changes in those interest rates, as well as these expectations that we have about future inflation or future deflation, which may change rapidly. So these expectations can change very quickly. And so this makes the exchange rates quite volatile. And we can see that with the great variance in red. So to summarize this chapter, first, money demand on an aggregate level is determined by interest rates, the price level, and national income. Aggregate real money demand depends negatively on the interest rate and positively on real national income. Second, money supply equals money demand, or real money supply equals real money demand, at the equilibrium interest rate in the money market. The short run scenario, Changes in the money supply affects the domestic interest rate as well as the exchange rate. An increase in the domestic money supply lowers the domestic interest rate. This lowers the rate of return on domestic deposits, causing domestic currency to depreciate in the foreign exchange market. For the long run scenario, changes in the level of the money supply are matched by proportional change in the prices, and it does not affect real income and interest rates. An increase in the money supply causes expectations about inflation to adjust, causing the domestic currency to depreciate even further, and causes prices to adjust proportionally in the long run, causing interest rates to return to their long run rate, and causing a proportional long run depreciation in the exchange rate. Number 6, expectations about inflation quickly adjust, but prices adjust only in the long run, which results in overshooting of the exchange rate. Overshooting occurs when the immediate response of the exchange rate due to a change is greater than its long-run response. And overshooting helps explain why exchange rates are so volatile. And this concludes the lecture